Hi, everybody. Welcome to our 10th episode of Scranton Isolation Informances. I'm excited about this one because probably the American musical artist that had the biggest impact in every imaginable way, in my opinion, on American culture and on world culture is Louis Armstrong. And it's always exciting to have the world's foremost authority on Louis Armstrong, Ricky Riccardi, who gets to work with all of his materials, his recordings, his writings, his furniture every day with us. The guy who's putting all the trumpet players everywhere out of business because he added trumpet to his repertoire of trombone, and who was inspired to play by the music of Louis Armstrong when he was 10, right? 10? I'll let you say it, 10, 12, 14, something like that. He was just a little guy. The guy who is suspiciously silent and still, and I kind of like him this way, but he'll be joining us a little late because David Ostwald plays his tuba, patriotic songs out his window every night in tribute to the healthcare workers in New York City at 7 o'clock. And my co-host, Captain Tom Cadogan from the University of Scranton Police. He is one of my favorite people on campus. I've watched him interact in difficult situations with everything from drunk kids feeling their beer muscles to elderly women who have been the victims of scams and everything in between, and always with incredible sensitivity. So let's go through and have these guys tell you a little about themselves, and we'll end with David, and he'll tell you about tonight's topic. Tom, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Captain Thomas Cadogan. I've been with University Police for 20 years. I'm currently in charge of daily operations. I've been a police officer since 1998. I've served 17 years with municipal departments. I believe one of the strong points that happened with the UPD was the accreditation that happened in 2016 and the reaccreditation that we obtained in 2019. I think that somewhat defined who we are, policies, practices, and daily operations. I've always felt that we've had good policy in operations, but I think this truly defined us. I think every officer that works here has to have a passion for it. I think
and you have to like kids, which is the thing that I measure everybody by.
And the joke I always say is I keep getting older and they stay the same age.
And then tell them about your musician background and how
so I'm thrilled to be here because I've been a drummer for 41 years. And if you want to confirm this, anybody can certainly contact you because you were a music teacher of mine. And two, you can visit the University of Scranton Police Facebook, click on the video tab, and you'll see a University Police music video that we made, and we had an absolute blast doing that. And three, I could probably show you some x-rays of my neck, back, and my carpal tunnel hands. So, that's where we're at. But
isn't that the truth with drumming?
Yes.
Wycliffe, everybody in Scranton knows you and loves you. You're our favorite guest artist of everybody in 39 years. But they may not know, not all of them may know your connection, how you live the legacy of Louis. So if you could share that with us as part of an introduction, we'd love that. Wycliffe Gordon, University of Scranton, class of 2006.
Yay, Louis Armstrong.
Only commencement speaker to get 6 standing ovations. Go ahead.
Oh, well, and that was fun. Well, I'm primarily a trombonist, but I was left in the band room when I started playing music at by the time I got to high school, I started age 12 and then 14, was in high school, 9th grade. So most of those years I would hang around in the band room and learn to play other instruments. So I play about 23 instruments, but my introduction to Louis Armstrong came on record when I think sometime between 13 and 14, a great aunt of mine passed, and amongst the things bequeathed to our family was a 5-record collection set of jazz music, and it was everything from the early slave chants to the modern jazz at that time, which included Sonny Rollins, tunes like Sunny Moon for Two, or Count Basie, 2 bass hit or 1 bass hit. But the music that kind of caught me was the music of New Orleans, and particularly that of Louis Armstrong, and particularly a tune called Keyhole Blues. During that time, we were into the pop music of the time, which was Kiss was a popular rock group, and Parliament, Funkadelic, and Kool and the Gang. But that music was Louis Armstrong hot sevens. It was always the 5s and 7s, 7 on that recording. And I just listened to that song over and over and over and over. And another group that played When the Saints Go Marching In. But I was always in love with the music from New Orleans, and particularly that Louis Armstrong. And I didn't even know that I was bitten by the bug, and little did I know how it would change and kind of shape my life, my musical life, as a child, and then my adult life as an adult, as much of that as I am. But and the music of Louis Armstrong.
I wasn't going to say it.
That's okay. I'll say it for you. And but it's I used to hear David say it all the time. And matter of fact, when I was honored with that honorary doctorate degree, David helped me deliver the commencement speech. During that time, it was something that was kind of, I imagined to be unprecedented, but I loved it. I enjoyed it, but I've been inspired by the music of, and eventually the life of Louis Armstrong. As I got, the music caught me at an early age, and then I began to learn about Louis Armstrong, the man, the humanitarian. And, since then I've been hooked. We call him a jazz musician, but he was everything. He was a pop musician. He was, everything, music and everything that I think that, I would desire to be as a human being. So that's me. That's it. I'm done.
Asti. You have to unmute yourself. Mr. Ostwald.
Is it my turn to talk?
Yes, it is. Tell us about you and the legacy of Louis.
Wow. Well, my epiphany with Louis musically was a tune called "Swing That Music," which was recorded by Louis Armstrong in 1936, where he did things that it's undeniable, cannot be done by a human being, musically. So initially I was roped in by the incredible music, the unique things, the previously unheard of things. It just knocked me for a loop. But I soon realized that the more that one looks into Louis Armstrong's music, that there's got to be a certain kind of a person behind that. And the more I read about Louis and the more that I learned about him, the more I realized that there's more to be learned from his life than just his music, which is enough for 10 lifetimes. But the way he just chose to live, the way he treated people, the way he approached relationships, the way he, when he met someone who was different from him, he instantly went into kind of respect mode rather than disrespect mode. Most people, whether they realize it or not, when they see someone who's different or who's from a different kind of place, kind of get into a little bit of a defensive mode, and it's a little bit, can be a little bit off-putting if you encounter somebody that's not like you are. But Louis seemed to have this, I don't know if it was natural or if he worked at it, but he just saw through all of that. And if someone acted like a jerk, then he disrespected them. But he started out by respecting every human being that he ever encountered. And that kind of is one of the many ways in which we can learn a lesson from him. What particularly interested me about Louis now with this program that we're going to do is there are always situations in life where you can think, what would he do? What did he do? Not just in the band, but also in terms of his life and how he handled himself and how he handled relationships with friends, with politicians, with enemies. There's always something to learn, but in particular, what's gripping the country right now is something that Louis had a lot of direct experience with, unfortunately. He grew up in the most abject of poverty in New Orleans. You can read about the details, but he was extremely poor, not even, like a lower working class, what you would say. He was just really poor. I mean, he was working, feeding his family from the age of 5 or 6 or 7. And his mother was forced into a life of prostitution. And he was supporting his sister and his mother and, running around the streets and dodging bullets right and left. Ricky can tell you more about all of that. And not surprisingly, he did have encounters with the law and with the police over the years. And I think the way that he handled that kind of adversity can, as with everything else with Louis Armstrong, can serve as a model of, or at least maybe the beginning of a guide for us to look at ourselves, all of us, to look at ourselves and see how we see other people and how to handle, not only how to treat other people, but also how to see other people, because that makes so much of a difference. And that's what I hope to focus the discussion on this evening.
And I think, David, it's interesting because as Tom and I know, one of the important things in Ignatian spirituality is extending the plus sign and, giving someone the nod, expecting the best. And it has always struck me that for every story, everything I read, everything I hear, that Louis Armstrong was a master of extending the plus sign to other people. And that's one of the reasons that I love Dr. Gordon, and I'm so proud to be friends with him, is because he does the same thing. David, by the way, before I move on to our main expert here, and author with another book coming momentarily, I would like to point out, because David was very humble in not telling you that he was one of the moving forces behind the establishment of the Louis Armstrong House and Museum. Am I correct? So, yeah, I am. I know I am. Look at the humility. He's not really this humble. I don't know what this is. This is the guy he plays on TV, I guess. No, you are. And you always put the focus on Louis. But, the work you put that all of us know that, you put in as a member of that board and in so many ways, endless amount of time. It was almost like a second full-time job for you when I first met you. And thank you. Thank you from everybody listening for that.
I'd like to also thank Michael Cogswell posthumously. Unfortunately, Michael passed away, but Michael took it from nothing, bunch of boxes, a whole bunch of boxes in Louis' basement, and turned it into the greatest archive in the world, which Ricky will tell you about. Okay. If you want me to be immodest, don't get scared now. I would like to mention also that I do have a band, the Louis Armstrong Eternity Band, that performs at Birdland every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. until March 11th. And I will take this opportunity to announce to the world that the phase 3 of the reopening of New York City will involve our appearance there on July 8th. This is the first you've heard of that. So that's the end of my plugs. Now let's talk about the matter at hand.
Let me introduce to you an amazing man who is in charge of safeguarding and getting the word out on one of the absolute treasure troves existing from American history, and one that impacts today in America every day. The legacy of Louis Armstrong. It gives me great pleasure to welcome back to Scranton, even though it's virtually, the great Ricky Riccardi. Ricky?
Thank you, Cheryl. Wow, what an intro. Yeah, we've kind of gone around this, but I'm in charge of the Louis Armstrong archives, which are located at Queens College. It's the world's largest archives for any single jazz musician. One perk is that they've all been digitized. And so anything you see or hear tonight that you want to see again or explore a little more fully, there are ways to do that. I'm going to give a little presentation in a few minutes, and I'll show you what I've been working on during the quarantine. We've been doing weekly virtual exhibits, which you can learn about a host of topics. And that's pretty much what keeps me going. I'm all Armstrong all the time. I finished teaching an Armstrong course at Queens College this semester. As you mentioned, my next Armstrong book is coming out this summer. So, I'm thrilled to be here talking about my favorite subject.
Okay. So here we go. I'm handing it over to you, Ricky.
All right.
I only ask, I ask for our viewers that if any one of us goes away from the screen, it's because a couple of us are dealing with electrical storms and thunderstorms and whatever. So we've already had one connection lost, but we've got 2 hosts for this meeting. So it'll keep going no matter what. Take it away, Ricky.
All right. So as David mentioned, Louis was born in New Orleans, 1901. You could only imagine the poverty. You can only imagine the racism. And he does have some run-ins with the police. It's kind of a 2-part presentation. It won't be maybe 10, 15 minutes or so, but I think it should inspire some discussion because there is so much in the news, of course, with the police and with everything, and we're going to get Louis's take on that and his run-ins. But also, I run all the Louis Armstrong House social media pages. I run the Twitter page and Instagram and Facebook. And occasionally we post on this stuff. And coincidentally, the week of the murder of George Floyd was the 50th anniversary of Louis recording an album in which he did We Shall Overcome and What a Wonderful World and Give Peace a Chance. And we started posting excerpts from that album and photos from the sessions and the sheet music and everything. And we had people on Twitter saying, whoever's running this page, stick to music, stick to music. That's what Louis always did. And that's what you should do too. And so the second half of what I'm going to present is going to be Louis speaking out against injustice, which some people, David wrote an op-ed piece in 1991 that opened up a lot of eyes, and it's almost 30 years later and we're still opening people's eyes. There's still people who are big Louis Armstrong fans who would just cover their eyes and cover their ears and don't want to talk about anything. It's like, oh, he was always happy, and everybody should be happy like that. And we're going to talk about that. But I am going to share my screen right now, and we're going to open up. Oh, so right now I'm disabled from sharing. So probably from the storm. If you can make me the host.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay. I have to do it again. Sorry.
No problem. I'll set up the clip though. The first clip is going to be in June of 1970, also 50 years ago this month. Louis appeared on the David Frost Show. David Frost wasn't there, and Orson Welles was the guest host. So you talk about 2 incredible American icons, and we're going to just show a little clip here of Louis and Orson Welles. Orson asks him if he was ever scared in his lifetime growing up in New Orleans.
Seriously, were you ever scared when you were a kid growing up in New Orleans?
Well, I tell you, we had some scary moments in New Orleans. Say, for instance, when we was newsboys, and things like that, where we were getting a little out and little African dominoes for pennies,
That's the worst you did?
No. That's a scandal topic. Because when the cops would get behind us, don't look like your feet was carrying you fast enough, And you got to make one of them fences with one hand and all those days.
Yeah.
Those were scary days because in those days the cops would whip your head and then ask you your name afterwards,
And you think that's something that's changed?
Well, I've been on it so long, I'm going to go down and see it. But it's...
Seriously, were you ever...
So Louis got out of that with a little joke, but yeah, that's he's talking about the early 1900s. That clip is 1970, and we're still talking about it in 2020. Sure enough, let's dig in now. The very first time Louis Armstrong's name ever appears in a newspaper comes from 1910. This was discovered by my good friend James Karst down there in New Orleans. And in 1910, a building in New Orleans had spontaneously combusted, and a group of 6 African Americans were found going through it trying to collect brass, ironically brass, to sell back to junkyards. But check the first paragraph. Quite a number of boys were arrested yesterday for being dangerous and suspicious characters. And if you scroll down and follow my arrow, Louis Armstrong of Perdido between Liberty and Franklin Streets. He was 9 years old, arrested for the first time for basically being dangerous and suspicious. And he was sent to what was basically a juvenile detention home called the Colored Waifs Home for Boys. He was only there for a couple of weeks. He was discharged in November. As David mentioned, he didn't go back to school. He went right to work, 9 years old, working on junk wagons, doing all sorts of odds and ends, but always kind of getting in trouble. He mentioned it himself, stealing and running around with the wrong crowd. And finally, New Year's Eve, 1913, Armstrong was arrested for shooting a gun off, not with any malice. He was celebrating the new year. All of his friends had firecrackers and fireworks and everything else. And Louis grabbed his stepfather's actual pistol, began shooting it in the street, and was arrested and sent back to the Waifs home, which leads us to Louis Armstrong's second mention in the newspaper. This is from January 2nd, 1913. The most serious case was that of Louis Armstrong, a 12-year-old Negro who discharged a revolver at Rampart and Perdido Street. Being an old offender, he was sent to the Negro Waifs home. The other boys were paroled. So already an old offender, that is Armstrong's reputation, you could say, but going to the Waifs home is the most important thing that ever happens to him, because it's here where he falls into the musical side of things. He had already been playing a little cornet. He had been singing with a vocal quartet, but the Waifs home had an actual brass band. The leader, Peter Davis, sitting up there, started giving Armstrong cornet lessons, and within 6 months' time, Armstrong was leader of the brass band. And here's the earliest photo we have of Louis Armstrong. The arrow is pointing to him right there, looking all confident. If he doesn't get arrested, I don't know what happens to the shape of American popular music. So to me, it's the greatest arrest that ever happened. But Armstrong spends a year and a half in the Waifs home. He comes back out, and he lives in New Orleans until 1922. And still was not always easy for him. But this next clip, it's going to be a little difficult to hear. I'll translate for you. But I think it's a good thing, like what David was saying, a good example of Louis kind of finding always the positive in these moments. He talks about being in the Irish Channel section of New Orleans and running into a cop. And Louis asks the cop what time it is. And the cop says 1 o'clock, and then hits him with a billy club. And now that's a pretty horrific story, but you'll notice that Louis turns it into a joke, turns into a punchline. This is Christmas morning, 1957. He's sitting with musicians, Carl Warwick, Charlie Shavers, the great trumpeter. They're all in Louis's home in Corona, Queens, which is now the Louis Armstrong House Museum. And let's listen to this.
You dream of an incident, you know, in New Orleans, when they're all down there called the Irish Channel. They had Irishmen something part, bars police, I'll make a long story short. One day I was waiting for a street call, and by myself, and I looked around, and you know, one of the big, fine Irish cops, you know, and actually, I said, I do, officer, would you tell me what time it is, please? And then something stuck out of him. Black stick hit me wrong to the wow! He said, just from one. I said, well, thank you, officer. I'm glad I wasn't out here about 12 o'clock.
So it inspires laughter, but, you know, Louis saying, glad he wasn't there at 12 o'clock. So he can laugh at those things later on, but that's kind of the childhood in a nutshell. He does leave New Orleans in 1922, and the way he always phrased it was he got northern-fied. He went up to Chicago, he went up to New York, he went up to the city, and then he always had this kind of complex relationship with New Orleans the rest of his life. He always referred to it as disgustingly segregated, and his whole life was about integration. He used to talk with the white clarinetist Mez Mesro. Mesro said that integration was their idea, the millennium. White and black musicians playing together. That's what he was leading towards. By the early 30s, he becomes a star. And he goes out on the road. And again, he's beloved everywhere. But as you can imagine, the South is not an easy place for him to travel. This is kind of, I'll show you the setup first. This comes from one of Louis Armstrong's scrapbooks here. This is a clipping from Memphis, 1931. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And it mentions that a Chicago orchestra, they were supposed to play Little Rock, and they were supposed to change buses. And they had a white woman, Mary Collins, that was the manager of the wife of Lewis's manager, Johnny Collins. They chartered a bus from the Dixie Greyhound lines at Jackson, Mississippi for the trip to Little Rock. On arrival at the Union Bus Terminal at Memphis, Felix Barron, station master, asked them to transfer to another bus. But Mary Collins said, "I want this bus and the same driver, and I'll not move out of this bus." So Mr. Barron explained that the driver had already traveled the distance permitted by law and that the bus needed repairs. He offered a newer and better bus, a competent driver, and guaranteed to have the party in Little Rock. The Negroes refused to leave the bus and exhibited some pistols, 6 to be exact. Well, patrolmen recalled, and their persuasive efforts fell on deaf ears that protruded above the fancy +4s, bright-hued golf socks, and just below vari-colored berets worn in the latest Jimmy Walker style. A call was put in for assistance, and a squad car was loaded. Detectives rushed to the scene. Still, the Negroes refused to leave the bus, so the driver started his motor and drove the party in style to headquarters. And sure enough, Lewis and the entire band was arrested. They spent the night in jail. Mary Collins had to call her husband. One of the musicians, Mike McKendrick, actually escaped and called Johnny Collins, and he got them out of jail. But you read the story, and it's kind of civilized, and it's like, well, the police just asked them, and they refused to leave. They were showing guns, and they were wearing all these fancy clothes. Preston Jackson was one of the musicians in the band. He was the trombonist in that band. And here is audio of him telling you exactly what happened. This is from a BBC documentary. You'll hear Humphrey Littleton sets it up. Then Preston Jackson tells the story, and there's a musical punchline that I will not ruin here. But we'll listen to this, and I'll show you a photo of the band.
From New Orleans, the band moved on to Texas and Oklahoma, and then doubled back and made their way up to Memphis. And it was there that they landed in jail. This was the Old South. Mrs. Collins, wife of the band manager, was one white woman traveling in a bus with 10 black men, well-dressed musicians at that. Worse still, she'd hired a smart new bus. The moment they arrived in Memphis, they had trouble with the police. Preston Jackson explains.
It was a good 7:30, 8 o'clock when we hit Memphis. And so the superintendent told us, well, get them niggas out of here because I'll have to put you in another bus. Well, the other bus was small, much smaller and more inconvenient. So she told him, well, I paid $50 difference in these buses so the boys could enjoy themselves. So after the hassle for about 10 minutes, he told the bus driver to drive all around to the terminal, which he did. And it looked like half the Memphis police force met us around there. All right, you niggas, get out of here. You're in Memphis now, and we need some cotton pickers, too. And so they put us all in jail with Mike McKendrick. I don't know how he got out there, bus. So they put us all in jail. I was first in line. After the death sergeant taking all the names, we stand around. One policeman had a call. He said, I'm going to tell you right now, you niggas, said, you ain't going to come down in Memphis, try to run Memphis, said, we'll kill all you niggers.
Guitarist Mike McKendrick, who'd managed to avoid arrest, got in touch with manager Johnny Collins by telephone. Incredibly enough, he secured the band's release, only on condition that they did a public broadcast from Memphis. That night, Louis announced that he was going to lay a little tune on the chief of police.
Now, I'll be glad when you're dead, you rascal, you. I'll be glad when you're dead, you rascal, you. Boy, I brought you into my home. You wouldn't leave my wife alone. I'll be glad when you're dead, you rascal, you.
It's the story of the musicians in the band almost had heart failure when Louis launched into that song. They couldn't believe he had the nerve to do it, but he did it with a big smile on his face. And they looked out in the audience, and the same officers who had arrested him the night before, they were all thrilled to get a dedication. So they were smiling and applauding, and everything was diffused. But Louis's subversive way of dealing with these things. Now we're going to flash forward. That's 1931. Armstrong obviously becomes an icon, star of screen, radio, eventually television, writing books, hit records in every decade. By 1947, he forms a small group. It's integrated. It remains integrated for the rest of his life. But by the 1950s, Armstrong was at the height of his popularity, but the civil rights era is really gathering steam. And Armstrong didn't really speak out on such things. He saw the changes. He saw how much he had accomplished. I could name all the things. First African-American to host a nationally sponsored radio show, first African-American to have featured billing in a Hollywood film, first African-American to have in his contract he wouldn't play a hotel unless he could stay there, one after another. So he didn't feel the need to really get on his soapbox. But as more African Americans were becoming more vocal, they were looking at him, smiling, entertaining, that whole thing. He was very popular with white audiences, and they started labeling him an Uncle Tom. They thought he was out of date. He's not speaking out. He's not speaking for us. And that all ended in September 1957. If you know your history, you should hopefully know this photo of Elizabeth and Hazel. This is Little Rock, when the Little Rock Central High School was going to become integrated, and 9 African-American school children were supposed to go to school, but the governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, sent in the National Guard to prevent the Arkansas National Guard to prevent this from happening. And every day, this was all over the news, all over TV, mobs of white people spitting and cursing at the black students. And Louis was watching this on TV. And finally, one day he was being interviewed in Grand Forks, North Dakota by a young reporter named Larry Lubenow, and Armstrong erupted. He said, the way they're treating my people in the South, the government can go to hell. He said President Eisenhower had no guts to let Faubus, an uneducated plowboy, run the country. Armstrong was supposed to go to Russia. He refused to go, and his words made headlines, and he saved the headlines. This next clip I'm going to show you here, this was actually saved by Louis Armstrong in one of his scrapbooks. I won't take back a thing I've said. Satchmo tells off Ike. The U.S., I'll read a little bit. My people, the Negroes, are not looking for anything. We just want a square shake. But when I see on television and read about a crowd spitting on and cursing at a little colored girl, I think I have a right to get sore and say something about it. So Armstrong put his career on the line. He did not back down. His road manager tried getting to go back on his word. He would not. This is I'll show you a little video clip of him being interviewed at an airport. This is days after he made his comments, and he's still
about. They go home, their parents tell them different. Because let's just pick up the Little Rocket. What are you going to tell the Russians when they ask you about the Little Rock incident? It all depends what time they send me over there. I don't think they should send me now unless they're straightening that mess down south. And for good. I mean, not just to blow over, to cut it out, I think. Because they've been ignoring the Constitution. Although they taught it in school, but when they go home, their parents tell them different. Say you don't have to abide by it because we've been getting away with it 100 years. So nobody tells on each other, so don't bother with it. So if they ask me what's happening, if I go, no, I can't tell a lie. That's one thing. You know, what's lying the way I feel about it.
Armstrong continues speaking, and it works. Like less than a week after his initial statement, Eisenhower sent in the airborne to escort the 9 children to school. A lot of people think that Louis's words inspired him to do that, but you could imagine the backlash. I mean, this is not the era of Fox News and MSNBC and partisans and entertainers and all that stuff. This is the most beloved black entertainer on the planet telling the government that they can go to hell and the president has no guts. So naturally, people start insisting on boycotting his records and, don't go to his concerts and the whole thing. He was supposed to appear on a TV spectacular hosted by Rex Harrison called Crescendo on September 30th, 1957. And the TV networks did not want it to happen. But eventually there was pressure. They decided to let Louis go on. And completely coincidentally, his feature was an instrumental version of Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. And he's sitting in the quality in this is very bad. I apologize in advance, but he's sitting in a rocking chair playing this beautiful spiritual, just days after the Little Rock incident. And in the second chorus, he quotes the Star Spangled Banner, which I think speaks volumes. It's live TV. They don't want him on TV. They want to boycott him. And he's combining the national anthem with Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, which I think is one of the deepest statements he ever made on this subject.
Nobody knows the troubles I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the troubles I've seen.
Knew what he did there. After the show, they sent him a copy of the audio. It's before the videotape, home video days. They sent him the audio of the special on acetate discs, and he dubbed that to tape. And then he went back and repeated it. And then he went back and repeated it one more time just from the Star Spangled Banner quote. So it was like, one day people are going to find these tapes and I want them to hear it 3 times to know that I just pulled that off on live TV. But what really hurt Armstrong is he received so much criticism from his own community as well. A lot of major figures, Sammy Davis Jr., Adam Clayton Powell Jr., they did not feel comfortable with Armstrong's choice of words, and they bashed him in the press. So don't listen to Louis Armstrong. He's an entertainer. He's not up on current events. And Armstrong said, I might not be up on current events, but I'm up on head whooping. So he did not back down, but he was so hurt by that for the next several years, he basically refused to speak about these things. Sometimes reporters would bring up Little Rock and he would say, oh, that's old news. I don't talk about old news anymore. But that changed in 1965. You should know this. This is, of course, Bloody Sunday, Selma. This is the beginning of the protest. And then just moments later, just a horrific moment. John Lewis, of course, in the middle there, Martin Luther King. Louis, at the time, Louis Armstrong was heading behind the Iron Curtain for the first time in his career. And he was questioned about this. He was in a hotel room in Denmark and asked if he had seen what happened in Selma. And Louis said, yes, he had. He said, it made him sick. He said, Hitler's been dead a long time, or is he? And then the reporter kind of got up the nerve and said, well, we don't see you out there marching. You know, what are you doing for the cause? And Louis said, listen, I support them at my donations, but the best thing I can do is play my horn. And if I was going to go out there and march, they would beat me. And the reporter said, you really think they would beat you, Louis Armstrong? And he responded by saying, they would beat Jesus if he was black and marched. And sure enough, the next day, that was headline news all over the country. I have it pulled here. There it is. Here's one of the headlines: Satchmo, they would beat Jesus if he was black. And we've posted this, and people, you know, really appreciate it. There's always some people go, oh, Jesus, you know, he wasn't white, but that's not the point. You know, we know what Louis is talking about here. And so he gets behind the Iron Curtain. And of course, everywhere he goes, Prague and, you know, East Berlin, all they want him to do is bash the United States, bash America, you know, talk more about race. But he's smart. He knows he's Ambassador Satch. He knows he's representing the government. And so he goes, I'm not speaking anything. I've got good fans, bad fans, black fans, white fans, but come to my concerts. You know, I let my trumpet do the talking. And on this concert, multiple nights survive. There's videos, there's audio. And every night, the third song he did was What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue, which was originally written by Fats Waller and Andy Razaf. It's known as the first protest song. And Armstrong hadn't really done it with any regularity for years. But all of a sudden on this tour, he does it every night, slower than ever, more dramatic than ever. At the time, we're just going to pick it up on the vocal. And this is East Berlin. This is about a week and a half after Selma.
Cold empty beds, springs hard as lead, feel like golden dead, wished I was dead. What did I do to be so black and blue? Even the mouse ran from my house. They laugh at you, scorn you too. What did I do to be so black and blue? Yes, I'm right inside, but that don't help my case, 'cause I can't hide what is in my face. But that does I say, how would it end? Ain't got a friend, my only sin is in my skin. What did I do to be so black and blue?
just as a way of closing, I mentioned 50 years ago at the end of May 1970, Louis recorded an album, Louis Armstrong and His Friends. And it's a beautiful album. There's no trumpet on the album because by this point he had been in intensive care twice. Doctors told him he couldn't play the trumpet anymore. But Oliver Nelson wrote these arrangements. And Louis was really affected by the assassination of Martin Luther King and the whole civil rights struggle. And he really wanted to make an album with a message. And that was the album. I mentioned as Give Peace a Chance. It has We Shall Overcome, which is just incredible. But I want to end with Little What a Wonderful World because everybody and their mother knows that song. But most people know the slow version with the strings and everything else. For the 1970 version, Louis opened up with a spoken word monologue. And I think that's actually the way I'm going to close this presentation because it's everything you need to know about Louis Armstrong summed up in about 30 seconds.
Some of you young folks been saying to me, "Hey, Pops, what you mean, what a wonderful world? How about all them wars all over the place? You call them wonderful? And how about hunger and pollution? They ain't so wonderful either. But how about listening to old Pops for a minute? Seems to me it ain't the world that's so bad, but what we are doing to it. And all I'm saying is see what a wonderful world it would be if only we'd give it a chance. Love, baby, love. That's the secret. Yeah. If lots more of us loved each other, we'd solve lots more problems. And then this world would be a gasser.
Would be a gasser, and I don't think there's anything I could say that's more profound than that. So I'm going to end the screen share and open it up to you guys. Comments, questions, anything else? Oh, I think everyone's on mute.
I never heard that performance of Black and Blue before. The underbelly of pain in that has got me really screwed up here, so I'll just mute myself.
Yeah, that's a deep one.
Yeah, he said he stated that Pops would do that around that time. It says every third song, in his concert. And I'm always when I was performing and doing a show called Hello Pops. Whether I did or not, because Louis Armstrong played music from every era of jazz, pop, Broadway, and everything. And I remember when I saw the footage of him doing that in Ghana, in West Africa, and learning the story behind that when I really started getting into, not just Louis Armstrong, the musician, but him as the man. And sometimes I'd always look out into the audience and I say, I've played for a wide array of folks, and I hope that I'm not offending anyone by doing this song. And to my, the greatness about it is that everyone, particularly folks I didn't think would really appreciate it from many different countries when I would do that and just kind of tell the story about the song. It somehow, through the pain of what that was, how the song was originally written, and when Pops changed a few of the verses and it became a protest song against racism in the mid to late 50s, it kind of brings people together and they think about it. And every time I perform and I say, I'm just going to do it. So I would do it. Even if I was playing one venue and we had two sets at the house turned over, I'd find a way to always put that in there. And it's a powerful song, and it creates powerful moments and the things that make us all common. So I just wanted to share that.
And I should point out the lyric change. The original lyrics were "I'm white inside, but that don't help my case." And if you notice in that 1965 version, he had changed it to "I'm right inside, but that don't help my case," which that's quite a difference.
I still say I'm white inside. And people have said sometimes, "Why do you say that?" I said that. Well, I thought it was the lyric, but it also plays into getting the point across. We're all the same inside. So you're muted.
Not for long. Don't get your hopes up. I'm really interested because, of course, my dad was a public safety professional. So I've got one for Tom to kind of chip in and for us to ask him about, because, you know, this, you know, you have this little kid, but at the time, police were treating kids like adults. And there is, like, I see in our campus police, Tom, even at 18 to 22-year-olds, we realize they're kids, they're adults, but there's a reason that they're young adults and they're learning. And I think, you know, everything I have seen is our campus police, you know, we treat them as with very great sensitivity. But back then, these cops were like beating on a 10-year-old, you know? And how has training changed in differentiating between like youth offenders and adult offenders? Because that, as a mother, every time I hear the story of his childhood, like I get a sick feeling in my stomach. How has training, and at what point do you think training has changed in differentiating age of offenders? And you know, how do we solve any of that that's still going on?
Yeah, and watching this, I'm kind of stuck here that this even occurred during that time. I mean, you know, the age of arrest or custodial is really the age of 10 in the Commonwealth, but I mean, you really have to commit a serious crime. So that's a severe sticking point for me. Even, you know, I know it's how many years ago, but still. So, yeah, I mean, training wise, I mean, we're constantly into juvenile training and, you know, transitioning into adult training and offenses and what happens there. But I guess I have a question for Ricky, and of course, anybody could jump in here. If Louis was able to sit down with the police at that time, how do you think the flow of that conversation would go?
That's a really good question, I think. But is it one we can answer? I don't know.
Well, I'm just saying if both parties agreed to sit down and discuss this, what's the flow of the conversation?
Yeah, because that might have some tips for today. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I'm not sure about the flow of the conversation, but I think Pops would lay information on the police, whomever he was talking to, like he did anything else. Like when he talked about the Little Rock incident, and you know, and even though he was hurt, behind the people that spoke out against him and said that, you know, because he chose to do what he did, he let his music and his performance do the speaking, and me particularly being someone of color, having talked with many African Americans and musicians that even looked at Louis Armstrong and thought that they called him Uncle Tom. And you know, there's a history, but there's a difference between Uncle Tom and what a Sambo was, but that's a conversation for another time. But they kind of looked down on him, and I think the Pops would have just spoke his mind. He would have spoken from his heart and just told the truth. It's like Duke Ellington paid him one of the greatest compliments. Louis Armstrong came from someone that came from nothing, and he gained everything in the world, you know, the riches and everything, and he never hurt anyone along the way. So even when his manager, Joe Glazer, said, "Pops, you made all this money. Come on, let's move. You move out here. Maybe it's Long Island or somewhere, and build a mansion, get away from everybody." And Louis said, "Why would I? I mean, it was hard enough for his wife to get him to live in to live in their house. He wanted to stay in the hotel. And he said, why would I ever leave my neighborhood? The barbershop is here, the kids are here, my neighbors on the street, and the ice cream eaters. And even though he went to, if you had to imagine, he went to the top, but his feet were always on the ground. So I imagine that the conversation that he would have had was just, Pops probably could have, if they were willing to see it, get whomever he was speaking to see inside of their best selves and possibly change some of the dynamics. But, he had so many things. He was one person, he was one man, but he just stood for just true humanity, the best of being a human being, that anyone could be. And if, I'm not sure exactly what he would say, but I guarantee you that if the people listened, some in many parts of the world, things would probably be different. And, things, what we just saw. And Cheryl, so you say you never seen those before. I've been watching them. I got hooked when I first saw the movie Good Morning Vietnam on What a Wonderful World, and the 3 versions of that song that I'd heard, and with him speaking about that, it brought tears to my eyes. So I hope I wasn't really on the screen in front of everyone. But I think that Pops would have just spoke from that place that he always spoke from, and whether he was singing, whether he was speaking about something, or whether or not he was playing, it was truth. It was just the truth, and what anyone as a human being would want. And if they listened to him, I think that he'd be able to get across to them, and maybe, just maybe, some things would change and remain that way.
I think he would have. Go ahead, Ricky.
Yeah, real quick. I can't speak for him, but Louis actually tells a story that I think is one of the most profound stories, and I have it on my phone here. I'm just going to read it real quick because I think this might be the answer. This is Louis Armstrong in 1967. Years ago, I was playing the little town of Lubbock, Texas, when this white cat grabs me at the end of the show. He's full of whiskey and trouble. He pokes on my chest and says, "I don't like N-words." These 2 cats with me was going to practice their Thanksgiving carving on that dude. But I say, no, let the man talk. Why don't you like us, Pops? And would you believe that cat couldn't tell us? So he apologizes, crying and carrying on. Said he was just juiced and full of deep personal sorrows. Something was snapping at his insides, you see. And then he commenced bragging on my music. Yeah, and dig this. That fella and his whole family come to be my friends. When I'd go back through Lubbock, Texas for many years, they would make old Satchmo welcome and treat him like a king. And that story, it kills me every time. But just that simple thing, Louis's friends are ready for violence. And he's just like, wait a minute, why don't you like us? And I think that is a question that, it's a simple question that could disarm racists and people to this day. Why do you feel that way? And then once you have to look inside, because Louis said the guy starts crying. So it might have gone as simple as that. One more quick story. Our friend Jack Bradley tells a story of Louis. This is up north, going through, I think, New England and being refused service on the road to eat. And Louis gets back to the bus, and instead of anger or anything, goes, that cat just hasn't figured out what life's about yet. And just like that kind of thing, no anger, but kind of pitying that guy. Like that guy thinks that, he refused service. He's doing this great thing. He hasn't figured out what life's about yet. So I think that's kind of, where Louis stays, and I wish he could have had those conversations 100 years ago, but it might have gone like that. David?
No, I think we can have those. I think we can have those conversations now, imagining that that's what he would say. I think that's exactly the right question, Tom. It's a perfect question because he's got a lot to teach us about that. And I think you heard what he actually did say, but I think he would say to someone in that conversation, I'm the same as you inside. I'm white inside. And that shouldn't affect my case. Imagine for a moment, he would say, imagine that I'm not black. Just imagine that I'm the person that you're talking to. Suspend belief for a moment and think about what is it about me that you hate so much? I'm a good guy. Pretend I'm white. Just stand back. Stand back for a minute. Pretend I'm not what you see. and think about how you'd feel. And I think that goes for everybody. I think it goes for people who feel unconscious or implicit bias when they see people of a different race. That's what I always imagined Louis did automatically. That's what I was alluding to earlier, that he would sort of just stand back from a different place. And it's not that he was literally, colorblind. Of course he saw that people were white or black, but that he could see everyone the same. And he could see a white person saying something as stupid as something that a black person might say, and he'd call them on what it was. And so if everyone, he would say to them, he would say, imagine I'm something other than what you're seeing, and would you react the same way?
And
would you be so quick to react in such a hostile way, whether you're a fan or whether you're, the Memphis police chief, or whether you're even, one of his black critics as well. And I think that's what we have to learn to do, is to step back in that way, take a breath and say, wait a minute, what's really going on here?
Well, and I think, one of the great privileges of my life I was brought to courtesy of Dr. Gordon, was visiting Louis Armstrong house. And, when you say, what would Louis say? There are all these tapes of him talking that are the most affecting things, and just hearing it. And what I know is whatever he would say, it would come from a place of love and caring. Because I think what he saw when he looked at other people, judging by what I heard on the tapes, I am no expert, and all of you can correct me, but it always sounded to me, no matter what he was talking about, the most mundane things or the most profound thing, depending on the tape. He spoke with love, he spoke with authenticity, and I think that he saw the commonality of soul of the human race. I don't know. Am I wrong? That would be my answer, Tom. Cone?
No, you're right. Exactly. I mean, that's what I get when I would first on the music scene. I was like, why do people think that Pops is, from his music, that's that old music, or from his way of performing? Pops was always modern. He was always in the now. As a matter of fact, he's not here physically, but he's still in the now, because things that he said, I mean, looking at these things that Ricky shared with us today, Maestro Riccardi, and then going back to this film from 1956 is one that I always refer to, with 100,000 people at the concert, separated by a few feet of rope, who weeks before were at war. And, they call a truce, and they're sitting here watching Louis Armstrong, of course, perform a full concert. But when he does Black and Blue, a song about racial and social unrest in America, and yet he's in Africa, it's like he's, come back to his motherland, home, and they celebrate him, and it stopped a war. It makes me think, like, wow, why not just, it's kind of a joke, but I'm like, drop boom boxes of Louis Armstrong music in these places where people are fighting, and even, during the riots, maybe people just, chill. I talked about it a few weeks back on this presentation we had, but I agree totally. That's what Louis was always about. That was, David would say it all the time. I don't really know what to say. It's the epitome of a way to be as a human being, not as a trumpet player, not as a singer, not as a pop, but just as a human being. And his trumpet just kind of led the way. It's what he did. I really loved him as a musician, but the more I got to learn about Louis Armstrong and what he stood for as a human being, even when he was ostracized by Americans, black and white, he still smiled, he still played his trumpet, and he still looked for the best in people. And like Ricky said a few moments ago, they just don't know yet. They don't know yet. They're not hip yet. And they're going to get it. I mean, he could easily been like, man, I'm going to put my trumpet down and pick up a weapon and just, go off. but he chose to continue with love, and I know he struggled with it sometimes, but that's where he came from. And you're right, Cheryl. That's where he lived. When I go in that house, I haven't been there. I was there before it became a museum, and I got a chance to hold one of his trumpets and play one of his trumpets, and I was like, man, for me, woo! So I agree with what you said totally. You got the right message.
And I think, one of the things that Wycliffe and I, we had watched a video earlier today, and, it ended with something that is so simple, but so profound, and that I think Pops modeled his entire life. And that is that you have won every battle if you can get people to care. And everybody's afraid of talking about things, if we don't talk about this stuff, how do we get people to know about it and care? And he did that. He did that with his music. He did that with his smile. He did that with the way he embraced his fellow man, I think. Do we have, if people listening and watching on Facebook have questions, please ship them our way. And I actually have one coming in now. And I'm going to deal with that while, David, you wanted to address that, right?
Which?
A little bit. What Wycliffe was talking about, the that
you can live your life by his example. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, absolutely. You can live your life by his example. I see much of his life as a series of parables, in the sense that he led in a way that there wasn't necessarily a stated moral of the story, like an Aesop's fable, but more like a parable whereby virtuous behavior, you can see what the right way to treat a human being is, or even how to act in a situation. I mean, the way that he diffused the situation in Memphis in 1931, I mean, that's a lesson in life, how to not let a situation explode that could have been really, really ugly. He did it with grace and humor and dignity. And there are dozens of other situations where you can literally say to yourself, what would Louis do? And you'll go the right path. You'll go down the right path if you do it.
Tom, I think you have a question there from a viewer.
Yeah. This is from Allison. What are the lessons we can learn from the experiences and life of Louis Armstrong and bring love into the conversation of our current day world? It seems no one wants to listen unless you force them to.
So how do we listen? We talked a lot about Louis playing, and we listened to Louis speaking, but we know that Louis listened, because otherwise he would have had nothing to speak to or nothing to play about. So how do we find that in Louis's example and bring it into current day? Examples of, Louis listening in intense and authentic ways. You got any of them in your bag of tricks there, Mr. Riccardi?
Always. Or
have we stumped the band?
No.
No, I think that the story that you told about Lubbock, Texas is an example of that, of him listening. He wanted to hear what the guy had to say. Why don't you like me? If it's equally as possible that the guy might have actually come up with a reason. And if he had, Louis would have addressed that. He would have listened. He wanted to hear what the guy had to say. And that's really key today. Rather than bristling at the question, listen to it. Maybe there's something there.
There's another tape where a fan says to Louis, I was taught to hate Negroes, but I'm crazy about you. And Louis laughs about it when he's retelling the story. But he mentions, he said, I admire your goddamn sincerity. so even something like that, wouldn't get that far under his skin. It was like, well, at least, you're being sincere about it. I'll give you that. But the man paid attention to everything, which is why I think he bristled so much at the notions that he was out of date or not up on the civil rights era. I mean, the fact that, he's integrating the band, he's recording with an integrated band in 1929. But yeah, as Wycliffe mentioned, the trip to Africa, stopping civil wars is amazing. He'd go to France, he'd go to Australia, he'd go to, South America, wherever they were going. One of the stories that Louis and his wife Lucille loved is in Caracas. Vice President Nixon had gone there in 1957, and they threw eggs at him, and there were protests and all this stuff. So Louis goes down in November of 1957, and they thought that there was going to be the same thing. There were going to be bomb threats and all that stuff, and everybody showed up and they welcomed Louis with open arms. Lucille's wife tells that story and everything. So he was very aware of the impact he had. I heard someone say it once, but no African American had a life like him up to that point. Like, you have to get into whether it's Michael Jackson or Michael Jordan or somebody, who can stop traffic, who could stop a war, who everybody from every background looked up to. And so he knew that every word he spoke was going to be dissected and was going to be, interpreted, which is why, sure, he's not on Twitter every day tweeting 100 times a day. But when he speaks out against Selma, when he speaks out against Little Rock, it's from an informed place. It's from a place of experience. It's from a place of love. It's these moments where he just hits his breaking point and it's like, listen up, I'm not going to remain silent on that. And I think that's what a lot of us, find ourselves doing in the current climate. And for me personally, I got lost in that 1970 album. The fact that it was the 50th anniversary and all of the protests and riots and everything were going on. And, Louis trained for that album like a boxer. He bought Beatles records. He bought, Harry Nilsson records, Plastic Ono Band, Pete Seeger. He had Martin Luther King's funeral. And he listened to that stuff and he knew the importance. And so everything he does is not just from a place of listen to me, here's my ego, I'm the final word. It's a life of experience. It's growing up in New Orleans. It's coming through the Great Migration. It's coming through the Harlem Renaissance. It's, meeting these people around the world, stopping wars, listening to all kinds of music, listening to the Beatles, listening to Miles Davis, listening to Enrico Caruso. And you mix it all up. I mean, I've always said, I think he's the most American figure of the 20th century. He's like, everything you need to know, in one man. It's Louis Armstrong.
Yes. Yep. Okay. No, yes, indeed. Just to add to what Ricky said, I mean, what he did and how he presented himself epitomized who he was and who he stood, what he stood for. I mean, you just look at his band. Louis Armstrong and his All-Stars, he wanted his band to look like what America was supposed to represent or what America was supposed to be or what it, what things was said in the Constitution about, America on paper. And I'm not going to get political, but his band easily could have just been all African-American men, but he had Danny Barcelona. He wanted the world to see. So if you look at a picture of his band, and it makes me think, I modeled a band that I put together lately called the International All-Stars. And it was inspired by Louis Armstrong. We're members in the band, and no one's playing now, but from Australia, from Japan, from Africa, from North Carolina, and everyone had something to say, and everyone has a place in the band. And I think that if somehow we can figure out how to make a band out of this country, I think things would be, okay. Because when you think about what we do as musicians and how we have to, how we have to come together, and Louis Armstrong, he just, epitomized that, and it wasn't by accident. It was on purpose. That's what Pops wanted. That's what he wanted. You hear his music and you see the face of his band, the All-Stars. And that's what we all, I think he was trying to say, that's what we all are. That's what we all should be. And that's how we should always approach people like this, with, the face of his band, the All-Stars.
I think you both just answered. We had a question from Nancy that we didn't even give to you, but I think you just answered it. Asking about musicians having to listen to one another and collaborate and in order to be successful. Tom, I think you've got a question from Jeff there, who is a middle school science teacher in the Bronx.
The question is, how do we learn to have conversations about uncomfortable topics?
And Wycliffe and I just talked about this, so I'm going to throw this your way. Can I do that?
How do we talk about uncomfortable topics? Oh, it's simple. The easiest thing to do in the world, well, is to talk, but you have to be willing to listen. And especially in the time now, things are very difficult, things are very hard, and it's easy to just want to pick up and just, go off. But you have to be willing to listen and to hear, and maybe to find ways to accept where someone's coming from. But I think that if we first of all, we have to have the conversation. And I was just saying that at a performance earlier this year. We have to talk about these things. Some things are uncomfortable to talk about. Like when I first came to New York and I met David, I was like, oh, the band, the Gully Low Jazz Band. And the name of the band went through a couple of permutations. But I was like, I never seen, and this is not sound funny, but I never thought I'd ever meet white people that love Louis Armstrong so much, and not white folks, but musicians. And I was like, man, I never met somebody that likes and loves pops as much as I do, or even more. And it's like, so any barrier that I may have based on my experience growing up Black in the South of the United States was automatically it was diffused. So I can talk with David, and we agree on a lot of things. And David's kind of kooky and all of that, but I'm like, he has a love for humanity, and I probably would not have been able to see that, but a link through someone like Louis Armstrong, who I continue to learn about and to grow by having met him, by having met Ricky. By having met you, Cheryl. And it's just like, and it's the only thing that in these trying times, just kind of gives me hope to think that, we have a chance. And I feel like I'm waiting, but we have to be willing to talk with each other and listen, because sometimes folks get a part of the story and that's what they run with. They have a narrow view and don't get the whole scope. And David and I were talking last night about history behind the song Amazing Grace. And it has a treacherous history, but through redemption, how did that bring us together? And when John Newton wrote those words, it wasn't about what he was doing, but if you get the whole story, and it's a song that I've heard in many, many different churches. As a matter of fact, another one of my favorite songs, Danny Boy, Dottie Rambo put words to it that referred to the song Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace shall always be my song of praise. And I'm like, wow, it's a song that I just heard in church, growing up. But how does that connect us? And unless we sit down and talk and try to become informed so we can make informed decisions about how we're going to live and how we're going to act and how we're going to respond and deal with other people. I think once we start doing that and having those conversations, meaning not just talking, but listening. A lot of times the best way to learn something is to say nothing and listen.
It's our president is always says, if you're not making them a little bit uncomfortable, they're probably not learning. And so I think that, uncomfortable, if you're having an uncomfortable conversation, pay really good attention because you could probably learn something from it. Tom, we got a question.
Aspect. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, David.
No, that's all right. Just a quick thought, which is in a way is the height of discomfort. The mirror is the height of discomfort, really. And I think that a lot of people, including myself, it's really hard to understand the implicit biases that we harbor. and the reactions that we have to situations, and our failure to see how it might be for somebody else in a certain situation. I mean, I have learned that it's in some communities, there's a fear of calling the police when something happens, which I just can't understand that. But I have to try and see it from a perspective that I don't have. I have to look at myself. I have to see about what my biases are, or what my view is from my lack of experience of certain things. And that's the most uncomfortable thing of all, is to really look at yourself and try and be honest with yourself without being, beating up or anything, or feeling, unnecessary guilt, but just try and see how differently I see things that I don't even see that I see differently. And that's kind of where it has to start for all of us. And it can even be an internal conversation.
Amen. But I am quoting my soul sister Maria here from a text or a comment. Amen to the mirror, but you have to be willing to look.
Yeah, well, of course, that's what I mean. Yeah.
And Tom, there's a question. I think you have a question that is from Maria.
Yeah, how do we leverage our love of music and musicians to advance justice in these times?
Short of dropping boom boxes from helicopters. Other than that.
I'm not sure. There's not one answer, but as I said in the presentation I did a few weeks back, I've gotten a chance to witness, as we have many examples that Ricky's shown us tonight with Louis Armstrong, but even in my short time here, how music can erase and help you to remove preconceived notions about what even music is. Like, I didn't talk about this, but the first time Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra played with the New York Philharmonic, and, those things like, we were going to play classical music, that's the legit music. And Clark Terry said something pretty funny. He said, I guess we jazz musicians are playing the illegitimate music. But I got a chance to see the, for lack of a better way of putting it, a glass wall shatter as we sat down and we played the music of Edward Green's, the Peer Gynt Suite. And they played the original, and we did Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn's version. And it was like, I remember going into the rehearsals and, we were kind of nervous. We knew what was happening in the band every now and then. Had some people that played a little sharp and played a little flat. And in the orchestra, we've always been taught in music, that's the height, that's the epitome of the career. Once you make the orchestra, that's it. They're the greatest musicians, they're the best musicians. And likewise, being taught, even a good jazz musician, there was a stigma that went with being a musician. And then if you were a jazz musician, it's like, wow. So we were going into those rehearsals, and we had a quiet nervousness in the band, and Winton just said, hey, man, you play what we play and how we play it. And we played the music, those arrangements of Grieg's music. And we afterwards, the first night we played to the Philharmonic's house, and there was no interaction because, as culturally and classical performances, they applaud at the end. They don't applaud solos. So when we were playing, it was like, ooh, man. So then the second night we performed they sold to our house of jazz in Lincoln Center. And a couple of times, Maestro Mazur, who was conducting, he had to stop because we're used to responding. You heard something that you liked, to someone in the orchestra played, someone clapped, and so Winston had to tell him, it's just, that's how we do. So by the third night, and then from then on to the time we went to Chicago to the Concert Cabal, Russian National Orchestra, it seems like the glass that stood between the classical and the jazz musicians was shattered, and we just became musicians. There's great musicians, just like they're great people. And somehow, I don't know I think music is going to have a lot to do with it, because a lot of the great music comes out of painful situations, or, out of pain comes great art. And someone said something, I'm paraphrasing, earlier about, without suffering or Cheryl, you said if you're not offending anyone, then you're probably not going to get anywhere. But seeing that happen even on a musical level, some kind of way we can figure out how to translate that, how to transfer that. I think that it would just really be cool, because to see those musicians, and everywhere we went, the trombone section would get together with, Joe Leslie in the ball section from the Philharmonic, Jay Friedman and the guys. It was just like, it became fun. And I remember being in Chicago, and they had a clarinetist there. We played C-Jam blues at the end of the night. Man, we got through all of the music. And then the folks, to hear us improvise, well, that's what we do all day long. Someone from the orchestra improvises, man, is like, oh, wow, that's great. But they don't get a chance to do that as much. And we were in Chicago, and this clarinetist, we clapped. Like, this clarinetist that was a soloist in the orchestra, he sounded like Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, and Sidney Bechet. He started playing in the whole Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, because we were situated down in the front. Everyone did this. We're like, everyone just turned around and is like, and what Pops says and what Pops teaches us, goodness and greatness is for everyone. And you can find that in yourself. And that, for me, was a musical example of how we can do away with some of these prejudices, that we have even in our own, profession. So if we can figure out some kind of way to translate that, and we did it with music, if we can do it with words and figure out how, I don't know, take lessons from Pops and how he did it. And that may be a little more difficult to do today, but things are a little different, but a lot of things are still the same. So I don't know. I wake up every morning like, what can we do about this? How can we approach this? And some way I always wind up on music is gonna have a large part, because when you're listening to music, I imagine that whether you're on this side or that side, front or back, up or down, in some way, shape, or form, everyone has a music that they like, or something about music that touches them in their heart. And, like I told you, Cheryl, when we were in Germany, and I thought if looks could kill, I wouldn't be here to talk to you now, but we played for those people in that square, and the people that looked at me like I was, they wanted me to no longer exist. They were then smiling. They were then dancing. They're singing, and I looked down at them. And at that time, in 1989, that was before the wall that separated East Berlin from West Berlin came down. It came down later that year. But I was just like, wow, but I was into the music, and it didn't strike me until I was teaching 15, 20 years later, and connection with Pops and that concert 1956 in Ghana, how music can remove, some of those things and make us get inside of our humanity. It can be a song, it can be a groove, and music from all over the world. And last thing, one of the most profound memories I have is being on the road with Linton Marsalis Septet. And we were in some country, none of us could speak the language, I forget what, and they couldn't speak English. But they took their horns out and they started playing some of music that they just learned off a recording. And all of a sudden, the language barrier that existed became very small, but the love barrier that opened up became very big. And I think that it's going to be some way, shape, or form, this language and music that's going to help us.
I think I had the privilege of actually seeing being present for quite a number of the rehearsals and performances with the band and orchestras. I would get there, and I remember distinctly one of the very first rehearsals, and it was like, I think on Nutcracker Suite with New York Phil. It was But, you know, I remember you walked, this may surprise some of our listeners, when Wycliffe was younger, he is young now, but when he was younger, he was sometimes late for things. Or never actually,
No.
he would appear magically like he was transported from Star Trek's transporter at exactly 30 seconds to the hit. Okay, like a minute before he'd be in, you know, shorts walking around downstairs having a cigar, and then 30 seconds later he'd be on the stage fully dressed. But they were getting ready to rehearse, and I mean, like, I tell this story, it's funny, but it was also almost a visual dropping of the wall between the orchestra and the big band. The whole big band was on the stage, and they were in front of the big band. And as I start telling you even what you're wearing, you're going to start laughing, because I sat back in an empty hall quietly watching this. And at like a minute and a half to the downbeat, Wycliffe's walking through the orchestra with this trombone over his head saying, "Excuse me, ma'am, excuse me, sir." He is wearing a Budweiser Frog t-shirt, copper silk pants, Nike gloves with the tongues cut out, and his sunglasses on his forehead because he just came from like another thing. Whitten looks back and just starts laughing and puts his face in his hand. And then Wycliffe gets to his seat and people are warming up, and he lets loose with that trombone. And up until then, the entire orchestra was just kind of sitting there. Everybody, I think both groups were sitting there, and just, there were like this blast of a phrase that he put out of that trombone, and all of a sudden, the big band and the orchestra, you could see them united. You could see their faces united. They shared this common experience of the Wycliffe Gordon experience. But I mean, that sound that like came from the heart, and you could watch it. You could visually see it, and all of a sudden, music happened. And it was a remarkable thing, and I saw that on more than one occasion, although not always in the Budweiser Frog t-shirt.
Which all goes to prove the point that that the key is, in terms of how we leverage it, is the more live music there is and the more accessible it is, the better the world will be, period, end of story. In terms of accessible, what you do, Cheryl, at the University of Scranton with the free concerts is a real public service, and I wish that was a more common thing, that people could hear live music. I think it's really important for kids to learn to play instruments in school, not just because then they can experience live music, but they can make it with others. That does so much for their self-respect. It does so much for their confidence. And it does so much for the community when there's a school band and there's a school band performance, and when there's the availability of live music in public for free or, you know, affordable. It's certainly something that can make a huge difference. And I play sometimes with a band called the 3 Million Majority Marching Band, which plays at protest rallies. And it has an incredible effect of getting people riled up, and at the same time getting people excited in a positive way about what's going on. So whether it's at a concert or whether it's just out in public or whether it's at a peaceful demonstration, live music is really, that's a real way to advance justice on many, many levels, in my opinion.
We have time for one question from a viewer, and then I'm going to do a wrap-up, because I just looked at the time. This felt like it was only 20 minutes long, but we're over time already. And this is from Art Comparetta, one of Captain Cadogan's colleagues in our campus police department. And he asked, and I'm asking this, and I'm going to answer it too. I'll let you guys answer, but I know what the answer is. I wish that learning about, no. Is there anyone today that carries on the Louis Armstrong philosophy? Who can be our teacher of today? I know what my answer is.
Wycliffe Gordon.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, yep. Yeah, right. Every single one of us looked right there. I think, Art, that's your answer. He embodies the spirit of Louis in so many ways that it's almost a little bit freaky, I think. And freaky in a good way. I recommend that everybody listening immediately get on, wherever CD Baby or Amazon or iTunes or whatever, and go buy Hello Pops. Go buy Hello Pops, because every morning I wake up to Hello Pops. And as long as that's what's waking me up, no matter what the day is going to bring, it's never going to be a bad day. Tom, can I ask you, so this is your first time meeting Ricky and David and hearing most of this stuff about Louis. Give us your impressions before we do our ending commercials. I'm thrilled you were here. I'm so proud. Our campus police have such great training, and watching them all, but particularly this fella, interact with nobody but a campus policeman sees the weirdo situations these guys see, and the amount of judgment that requires is breathtaking. And because we're friends, I often see them and hear about them. But, tell us today, what's your reaction to all this stuff?
I'm blown away, and I'm so glad you invited me. I'm definitely into this subject. And I'm definitely going to get deeper into this subject. There's no doubt. I agree with all the comments about Wycliffe. I love you, man.
Thanks.
Tom, how do you feel that there's, and I'm putting you on the spot. I was just going to say, I don't want to put you on the spot, but that's not true. So I won't say it. Is there any way that, thinking about it, you feel like, being a musician yourself has helped you in communicating with people as a law enforcement officer?
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at the law enforcement officers, that they're form bands, and it's almost like a decompress for everything, right? It just, you united, everything is there. But yeah, I mean, I could sit down and listen to any one of these guys for hours. I really could. I mean, just the history that they have, and they know about and can talk about it in the correct way. So I'm glad you invited me. I had an absolute ball.
Well, thank you for joining us. You want to do a little commercial for University of Scranton Police Department?
Well, the only thing I want to scream out on our behalf is let's get our students back.
Yeah, right? Honestly.
Yeah, I miss them.
Asti, this was the time for your commercial, so.
Yeah, I know. My timing was off. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I was so excited I couldn't. I actually have my first gig on July 4th, and I'm eager to see what it's going to be like. It's going to be at a country club in New Jersey for Independence Day. And then it looks like on July 8th, providing that phase 3 happens, we're going to be back at Birdland in the evening, not at our usual 5:30 slot. They're going to be testing out having live music at Birdland, 315 West 44th Street. The tables will be 6 feet apart. The bandstand is 12 feet by 18 feet. There's 6 of us, so we'll be able to socially distance. And
I believe you have a gig this Friday on a street corner from Birdland to Buskett.
That's not a gig, but I've been playing. I had the COVID, and I got better on April 2nd. And one of the things that helped me get through it was playing my horn, because it helped my lungs, actually. And the great thing was that at 7 o'clock here in New York, everyone has kind of died down a bit, but at 7 o'clock, everyone would get out and cheer and make a lot of noise and bang pots and pans and stuff. And I figured, the best way to get applause for a tuba solo is to play one when people are clapping already. In fact, it's the only time you get applause for a tuba solo. At least in my case, not when Cone is playing one. And so
Wayne Smith wants you to know that, the way you give love by playing your tuba outside your building every night is very impressive. And, he was asking about what that experience meant to you during isolation, but you just answered that. But I just want to know if anybody threw anything. Did anything get in the tuba?
No. Here's the thing: we don't play outside. I play by myself out the window. What you're referring to is a couple weeks ago. We're in phase 1 here, and so things are getting a little bit loose and precautiously. And my friend Adrian Cunningham was going away to to Spain for the summer because there's no work here. and he wanted to drop off some of his horns for safekeeping while he was gone. I said, let's play something on the street. So I hadn't played outside. I figured as long as he's here, we'll play a duet. So we did that, and it had a nice response on Facebook. So there was a lot of people requesting that we do it again. So last Friday, Will Anderson came by. We played a duet on the sidewalk. This Friday, continuing the tradition and taking small steps into expanding the band, we're going to have Will and we're going to have Joe Boga.
Oh, yay!
And since I live between West End Avenue and Riverside Drive, we're going to play West End blues for the neighbors. And then we're going to go to the park and have some pizza, socially distanced. So
very nice.
Watch for that on Facebook. We'll have someone film it and put it up. And thank you, Cheryl, for making Joe.
It was my pleasure.
He's a great kid.
Wycliffe, commercial.
Oh, no commercial. Let's just.
I can do it. If you're not going to do it, I'll do it.
Oh, you're going to do it anyway. So I'll just let me get my little bit in. No.
Okay.
Thanks. When I have to admit, when I looked at this title, it went from Pops, this Tops, the Pops and the Cops. I'm like, no, what are we going to talk about? And because of everything that's going on now, you can sometimes find yourself close to getting shell shocked. I'm scared to go outside. And I guess I should have known that. Well, I did know that when you're talking about Louis Armstrong, always something good is going to come out of it. And he made the best of all, negative situations. So somehow, that gives me hope. And thanks for plugging my record, Hello Pops. But David has a record, Blues in Our Hearts. He has a couple of them out. And I would just suggest to people, any Louis Armstrong record you put on. I mean, those are not all Louis Armstrong records, but a good deal of them are CDs, LPs, and just listen. Check out Pops, and then close your eyes and maybe your mouth, and sometimes and just listen to yourself. Just close your eyes, and just check out where you're coming from in your heart, and that's what I try to figure out every day. When I wake up, I think I lay down for an extra hour and a half, and I'm just thinking about, what are we going to do today? Yeah, I have no more airplanes, but in light of everything that's going on, I'm trying to figure out how can we deal with this and how can we address this. And I'm glad that you called me and asked me to be a part of this. And anytime I can do anything with David and Ricky and, Captain Tom, it's a pleasure to see you again. And, Bogey always... you're you. I love you. You get on my nerves sometimes, but I love you.
No.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, www.wycliffegordon.com. There's, you can buy recordings. You can buy, if you're a band director, there are some wonderfully recently produced charts for big band, for combos, for trombone ensemble, for all sorts of things. You can find links to about a gazillion CDs that he's on, and just www.wycliffegordon.com. And let's wrap it up with Ricky Riccardi. You're sitting on an American treasure. How does everybody tap into it, Ricky? Everybody can get access, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. You know what? Let me just do a quick screen share again, if that's still up. Why not? The thing that's been keeping me going through the virus has been this website here, virtualexhibits.louisarmstronghouse.org. I mentioned early on, everything is digitized. We got a $2.7 million grant from Robert F. Smith Funded Foundation. So once the COVID hit and the museum closed and the archives closed, I thought I might be out of a gig, but we realized that this would be a great way to share the treasures. And so we came up with this website every week.
My favorite.
Yeah. Every week we put up a new post. The theme of the website is That's My Home, because we're all stuck at home. And what did Louis do when he was at home? This is an entire post called Eulogizing the Chops about Louis warming up. And sure enough, I mean, you can go through here and listen. So that's one entire post there, a post of 2.5 hour interview with Dan Morgenstern and Jack Bradley. You can listen to the whole thing from Stravinsky to Gizzard, Woodson Lewis's record collection. That actually became a whole series. Armstrong's collages, Armstrong and Queens, Armstrong and civil rights, the story of Lucille, then that album I mentioned, the Louis Armstrong and His Friends, 4 parts on that album. A 3-part series on one of his scrapbooks going page by page. So every week we update with 2 or 3 posts. I mentioned Lewis's record collection. If you hit Satch's Tracks, we have a different selection every week of something Lewis listened to. And last week we shared this recording Lewis made in 1958 of him reading Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address.
7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
It's the hippest reading of it ever created. So that's been keeping me busy, and I have literally weeks and weeks and weeks planned at 3 posts a week. So that is virtualexhibits.louisarmstronghouse.org. And again, that's the curated experience. If you want to go whole hog, collections.louisarmstronghouse.org is the full online collection. You can create an account and you can log in. And once you're in there, we mentioned all the tapes. Oh, I got it. If you want to listen to any kind of tape, just spitballing here. How about one of these? Here's the audio. You can. They have beeps in there to prevent it from being commercialized. But you can listen to the audio. You can read scrapbook pages.
Relax, his slippers and slacks.
Whatever he's listening to, but yeah, you can dig deep. If you're studying Africa, you get 1,349 results, albums, photographs, the whole thing. So that's collections.louisarmstronghouse.org, and the curated experience, that's my home, is virtual exhibits. And so those are the things that have been keeping me busy through this. From a plug standpoint, you mentioned I have my second book coming out. My first book came out 9 years ago this week, which seems like a long time. And that's called What a Wonderful World. That was about the last 25 years of Armstrong's life, the All-Stars years. And
I vouch for it. All of my students and alumni listening know my daughter gets so mad. I just think reading about history for me is so boring. You write, it reads like a novel, Ricky.
Thank you. Well, that was my plan the whole time, was just to write that book, shine the spotlight on the last 25 years, Armstrong and civil rights, Armstrong and Little Rock, the whole thing. And then I realized that nobody paid attention to his middle years, the big band years, the years of the Memphis Police and breaking all these barriers and all that stuff. So the next book is going to be called Heart Full of Rhythm, and it's the big band years of Louis Armstrong. And Amazon lists it as a September 1st release, but it went to the printer today, so it could actually start showing up in early August at some point. My plan was never to go backwards like this, but I'm already getting pressure from David and others to start working on 1901 to 1928 and finish off the reverse chronology Star Wars trilogy, but one step at a time.
The prequel.
Yeah. But one step at a time. The middle years will be out this summer, so I'm excited about that.
Okay. And then I hope that all of our viewers, if there are questions we didn't get to, I encourage you to continue putting them in the comments on Facebook. And if any of these guys have some time to bop over there and see them, they can maybe give you some brief answers, or I can do the same. And this will remain up for viewing. So you can, if your friends have missed it, or if you want to, in about a half hour, go come back to here, and you could just hit share and share it on your own page so your friends can listen and watch. And we have a number of these coming up still this summer. We are going to have Joseph Boga and Kako Miura on trumpet and violin talking about historical performance principles and concepts and how they are similar between classical and jazz, how the concepts are similar but are actually, put into place differently. Like I don't really know what they're going to talk about, but it's something like that. And they're both geniuses at it, okay? Because it's what they do. And David Ball, organist out at what used to be the Crystal Cathedral in LA, and they're just rebuilding an organ in the middle of COVID. He'll be talking to us. Lawrence Schoenberg is going to come. He's going to be our guest. He's going to grace us with his presence. And also Kenny Rampton, trumpeter from the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, is going to talk to us about music as a healing art. You could also scroll back on our Facebook page. You can find hilarious hour and a half with Jeff Kernow, cartoonist, comedian, short, hilarious filmmaker, and brilliant trumpet player with the Philadelphia Orchestra. Lawrence Wolf from Boston Symphony, Josh Rosenblum, who just got not one, not two, not three, but 4 Drama Desk nominations. It goes on and on and on. As I said, this is number 10. We hope you'll be with us for everyone between now and number 50. Fellas, thank you so much. Just, I can't believe the way the time flew. And there we go. We're repping. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And go listen to some Louis.